Hello and welcome to Business Live. Coming up in this edition, cost of loans to become more expensive as Bank of Ghana hikes policy rate to 27%, citing threats to inflation and growth outlook.
The committee is of the view that the significant upside risks to the inflation outlook remain. To continue to anchor inflation expectations, the committee therefore decided to increase the policy rate by 250 basis points to 27%.
Meanwhile, financial analyst questions the continuous increase in the policy rate by the Bank of Ghana, saying it is not achieving the desired results.
What I realize is that they are doing the wrong diagnosis, because once you get the diagnosis wrong, obviously the solutions that you are going to propound are also going to be wrong. As far as you increase the monetary policy rates, that means treasury bills will go up. When treasury bills go up.
Coming up in this bulletin as well, Institute of Economic Affairs proposes an increase in capital expenditure to at least 6% of GDP in 2023 to boost investment projects.
Calling for a significant increase in capital expenditure. In fact, if you look at the budget 2023, capital expenditure is projected to be 27.7 billion, and this is 3.5% of GDP.
We have details of these and many others lined up for you. Please stay tuned in. Welcome back. Straight to our very first story. Loans will become more expensive as the Monetary Policy Committee of the Bank of Ghana has increased its key lending rate by a significant margin. It hiked the key lending rate to commercial banks by 2.5% to 27% at a press conference today after a meeting to review developments in the economy last week. Here is the governor of the Bank of Ghana, Dr. Ernest Addison.
That there is evidence that the policy rate increases in the past few months have helped dampen the pace of monthly price increases. Between May and August 2022, the monthly inflation number eased from a peak of 5.1% to 1.9%. However, this was reversed in September and October on account of additional shocks from upward adjustment in ex-pump petroleum prices, utility tariff adjustments, and transportation fare increases. In the event, inflation jumped in October to 40.2% and has dragged along with it core inflation, which is almost at par with headline inflation and indicating significant underlying inflation pressures and upside risks to the inflation outlook. The inflation forecast shows that inflation will likely peak in the first quarter of 2023 and settle at around 25% by the end of 2023. This forecast is conditioned on the continued maintenance of a tight monetary policy stance and the deployment of tools to contain excess liquidity in the economy. There are, however, some risks to this forecast that would have to be monitored, including additional pressures from the proposed VAT increase in the exchange rate. Continued vigilance to the evolution of these potential price pressures in the outlook will be key. The committee is of the view that the significant upside risks to the inflation outlook remain. To continue to anchor inflation expectations, the committee therefore decided to increase the policy rate by 250 basis points to 27%.
All right, so there's more for you in the following report on the back of the policy rate.
Speaking at a news conference in Accra, Governor of the Bank of Ghana, Dr. Ernest Addison, noted that the increase was necessary to help deal with threats to inflation and economic growth outlook.
The inflation forecast shows that inflation will likely peak in the first quarter of 2023 and settle at around 25% by the end of 2023. This forecast is conditioned on the continued maintenance of a tight monetary policy stance and the deployment of tools to contain excess liquidity in the economy.
The governor of the Bank of Ghana also noted that measures have been taken to deal with the recent liquidity issues in the banking sector.
When the cocoa money came in, the situation improved significantly. I mean, we put out almost the entire amount that we had received in foreign exchange in CD liquidity at the banks. So the banks had a lot of CDs. I mean, because it takes time to buy cocoa, right? So that kind of liquidity does not dissipate overnight.
On the recent decision to restrict foreign supply for some imports, the governor noted that this was to help manage its reserve position.
The numbers that I have suggest that we experienced an outflow of 5.2 billion year to date in 2022. That's the extent of, pressure on the central bank's reserves because we had to pay for our loans. Almost 3 billion outflows to service debt, interest and amortization.
Dr. Ernest Addison revealed that on the Go for Oil program, it wasn't an agreement reached with all the mining firms and not an imposition. The governor maintained that closing the IMF staff program on time may go a long way to stabilize things on the broader economy as well as the local currency.
My colleague George Yafe with that report there. Away from that, accounting and auditing firm PwC will this Wednesday, November 30th, hold a post-budget forum on the 2023 budget. Now, the forum is expected to attract experts from academia and some leaders from the business community. Joining us on phone is country partner of PwC, Vish Ashangmo. Vish, grateful you could join us on Business Live. First off, what is your take on the 2023 budget? And of course, the budget we're expecting, would you say met your targets?
Yes, good evening. Thanks for the call and thanks for the audience. Good evening to your listeners. I think that given where we are as a country and given the state of the economy, which I think was clearly outlined when the president spoke to the nation on I think it was the 30th of October, it stood to reason, actually, that the budget was going to present or was going to try and deal with significant difficulties in the economy. So to that extent, I don't think it was too much of a surprise that the budget focused on additional revenue measures as well as signaled some expenditure cuts, even as the discussions with the IMF are ongoing, yet to be concluded. So answering your question as to whether the budget was in line with expectations, I would say broadly yes. No major surprises. I think it signals the direction that the economy or that the country needs to go in over the next few years to achieve the macro sustainability that we all desire.
Would you say that the 2023 budget basically will revive the struggling economy with support from the International Monetary Fund?
I think that reviving the economy is let's call it a medium-term endeavor. It's not going to happen overnight. What the 2023 budget does do is it has signaled the key initiatives that the government intends to pursue to achieve that stability. So when you talk about aggressive mobilization of domestic revenue and streamlining and rationalizing expenditure, for example, promoting and diversifying exports, these are things that will not necessarily happen overnight. The policy direction has been set. As is always the case, it's the implementation that really makes the difference. So it's a question of how we implement, and the targets for 2023 in particular are quite challenging. But beyond that, we need to sustain and embed these policies through effective implementation before we can actually begin to see the transformation of the economy that we're all looking for. So I think it sets the right tone. It's actually the implementation that will make the difference.
Great. Now, Vish, would you say that the 2023 budget should, engagement with the IMF delay have any consequence on the economy?
Well, definitely. I must admit, one of the things that is not particularly clear to me, and maybe other stakeholders can share their perspective, is the extent to which any IMF support has been factored into the budget. I'm not sure because I note there's a piece where the minister speaks about the revision of interest payment and other financing charges once the IMF program and the debt exchange program has been concluded. So that tells me that perhaps not everything has been factored in, understandably so, because those discussions have not been completed, and so the details are not yet known. But to answer your question, if we are unable to achieve a program with the IMF, then of course what that means is that we will have to struggle through this situation on our own for a good few years to come. It just signals that difficult situation in which we find ourselves will continue for perhaps a bit longer than we would like, and maybe a bit more painful or a lot more painful than we would like. Those details are not particularly clear to me at this stage, but I'm hoping that the clarity will emerge over the next days and weeks.
Thankfully, the finance minister had said that they are, making progress in relation to the engagement with the IMF on that. Now, I know you've been engaged in government sometimes on measures or basically providing advisory, assistance to government. What should government be doing to achieve the long-term economic sustainability? Yes,
well, I think government and all of us know what needs to be done, right? And as I said, I think the policy direction is clear, and if we're able to sustain it, it should actually turn things around. The question is implementation. So, for example, we talk about domestic revenue mobilization. Now, all of us know that we need to pay our taxes. A large number of us, unfortunately, do not. And so when the need arises to introduce a 2.5% increase in VAT, and I guess the reason they chose the indirect tax approach is because of the wider reach. In other words, it cuts across a larger segment of the population. These are things that unfortunately need to happen in order to bridge the gap between our revenue and expenditures. Of course, there's the call for greater transparency and greater accountability in how money is spent. And I think that has also been signaled. And I use the word signal because obviously it's the implementation that, as I keep saying, will make the difference. So to your question, I think it's a matter of continuing down the right path and being very focused and driving, for example, our exports in favor of the continuous importation that we've been faced with over the years. So I think the path is clear. It's for all of us, government, citizens, everybody, to make sure that the implementation is effective and that we stay the course. Otherwise, we will have this yo-yo effect of being up and down and seemingly taking one step forward and two steps backward.
Finally, let me find this from you. On Wednesday, what should we expect at the post-budget forum?
Yes. Okay, thank you. So on Wednesday morning, we will be having our post-budget forum, which will have the Honorable Deputy Minister, Madam Abina Ose-Asare, as our guest speaker. When we hear from government, represented by her in this instance, and then we have other key stakeholders, the Association of Ghana Industries, the Association of Bankers, and then the view of ISA, the Institute of Social and Economic Research. So the idea is to disseminate the budget to interested parties, businesses, citizens generally, anybody who is interested. We're making provision for online participation, so anybody can dial in, listen, ask questions, get clarity. And the idea is that, even in this difficult situation, there is always opportunity. So if we can identify the opportunities, and we can understand our role in driving this budget and this economic transformation forward, then that's the overall objective. That will be a good outcome for us. So that's what we seek to achieve on Wednesday morning.
All right, Vish, grateful you could join us on Business Live.
Thank you very much.
Partner of PwC, Vish Ashang, was speaking to us there. Well, let's go to the Bank of Ghana, where financial analyst Christian Techijan has questioned the continuous increase in the policy rate by the Bank of Ghana, saying it is not achieving the desired results. According to him, the policy rate hike is not working because the prevailing inflation in the country is a cost-push inflation. He is warning that the cost of doing business in Ghana will continue to worsen. He spoke earlier on the marketplace.
What I realize is that they are doing the wrong diagnosis, because once you get the diagnosis wrong, obviously the solutions that you are going to propound are also going to be wrong. What we are experiencing is the cost push inflation in Ghana. With a cost push, so far as you increase the monetary policy rates, that means treasury bills will go up. When treasury bills go up, lending rates also go up, and cost of borrowing therefore becomes expensive. So with a businessman being a rational economic agent, definitely you also want to push the cost that he is incurring on the products, that is the products and services that he's actually rendering to the general public. So prices will continue to go up so far as you increase the monetary policy rate. So we need to backtrack from that regime where we think we need to mop up excess cash, excess liquidity in the system to be able to tame inflation, to putting in pragmatic measures that can actually reduce the cost of production, cost of borrowing, cost of lending, and all of these things. Once it is addressed, yes, then we begin to have a proper conversation and we'll begin to target the inflation actually coming down. But with the policy rate being hiked now and over, I don't think we are going to see the end of higher inflations in Ghana any moment sooner.
Well, I heard the governor say they expect inflation to peak during the first quarter of this year, and that's a long way coming. And so my next question is, how sustainable is this, seeing the impact on the cost of credit? Loans are going to become more and more expensive.
Exactly. So we were told a couple of months ago that was actually going to peak in October, and that hasn't materialized, and now it's being pushed to first quarter next year. What that means is that the solutions that are being propounded to solve the higher inflation rates that we're experiencing in Ghana has not been working. So it is high time we look at those measures that can drive costs down. Once cost comes down, yes, then we'll be able to address the problem of inflation in Ghana.
Now, Dean of the University of Cape Coast Business School, Professor John Gachi, has said the reduction of the electronic transaction levy to 1% should be complemented with a robust system devoid of leakages to rake in more revenue. Speaking to Joy Business at the 2022 induction ceremony of the Association of Certified Chartered Economists, he said the knee-jerk approach to the expansion of the revenue base domestically is hurting the economy. Hence, government should be proactive.
The event was to induct new members of the association. Professor Gachi advised the government to ensure a strict regulation on the financial system of the country while putting in place measures to further increase revenue domestically.
Well, I think the reason is to expand the revenue base, to rake in more money through the e-levy, to come to terms with the reality that the e-levy has now contributed more, because the reduction from 1.5 to 1% is occasioned by a collapse of the base. What it means is that there's no limit to transaction, and by so doing, you engulf so many into the transaction space to increase the revenue. So I think it's going to increase revenue. That is the main purpose. Yeah, it's not just about the reduction, but it's about capturing more people into the e-levy space. So now when you transfer or you transact with 10 cedis, you are paying. If you are transacting with 20 cedis, you are paying. So all these things cumulatively put together at the end of the day will contribute to more tax revenue than it used to be.
Head of Operations for the association, Konedi Yadom, appealed to all chartered members to use their acquired certificates to contribute meaningfully to the economic development of various organizations, private businesses, and national development.
These are qualified members who have gone through our trainings, have gone through our exams, so they've been able to certify standards in terms of academics and, let's say, ethics. So they've gone through all the ethics, they have working experience, and then they've been certified as professionals in our various fields. The Association of Certified Chartered Economists, we have 7 main areas that we charter candidates in. And then all of them comes with their own job prospects. We have financial economics, we have energy economics, we have petroleum, we have industrial, economic policy analysis, and then health. So all these are specialized fields. So you can become a chartered economist, not in all the field, but in specialized fields. And these fields come to their own job prospects.
The chartered members, according to the association, need to consider mentorship in order to fast-track their experience and confidence building. Other than that, they should adhere to the professional code, since ethical requirements are meant to ensure that they practice professionally and objectively.
And more on the e-levy, government can only accrue more revenue from the electronic transaction levy if it reduces the rate to 0.5% from the present 1.5%. That's the view of a senior lecturer at the University of Ghana Business School, Dr. Benjamin Amoah. His view has also been corroborated by Professor Godfred Bobkin of the same University of Ghana Business School. Now, despite the implementation of the e-levy, total mobile money transactions in the first months of this year grew by 12.9% year-on-year to 833.3 billion cedis. Now, this means many consumers have been evading payment of the levy. Dr. Amoah urged government to consider revising the rate further down when he spoke on the marketplace.
There will definitely be an increase in the revenue accruing to government. But as to whether that will make it possible for government to achieve its target is another issue altogether. Definitely reducing it from 1.5 to 1 is good news, but still it's expensive. You see, you always have to compare how much the service providers, who are the original owners of the service or product, are charging, and then look at how much the government, that is a public service provider, is charging on a product. And if you look at that difference in pricing, you clearly see that it is too expensive for the individual or the businessman to use the product. We should not forget that you can still use cash, you can still use check for payment, and you will not suffer this electronic levy. So once all these substitutes exist, and they are not in any way illegal, and you have a service that you have to pay a levy that is expensive, then definitely most people will prefer not to use the mainstream service, but to use the other substitute that exists and also exploit the loopholes. So the call is that government, if possible, still try to look at it and bring it down further so that it becomes more expensive for users to try other avenues. The way it is still less expensive for individuals to switch and for individuals to avoid it. And you want to make it more expensive. And the only way you can make it more expensive is to reduce the rate so that the incentive to go around the e-levy will be reduced. Then we can see more revenue coming.
Hello, welcome back. This is still Business Life with me, Pious Kojo Backah. Now, the Institute of Economic Affairs is proposing an increase in the capital expenditure, that's CAPEX budget, to at least 6% of GDP for next year. According to the Institute, the 2 billion cedis capital expenditure for 2023 is significantly inadequate to meet the huge environmental or developmental needs of the country. Addressing journalists at a post-budget engagement, Director of Research Dr. John Kwache said the Fiscal Responsibility Act should be amended to prioritize capital expenditure. There's more in the following report. Speaking at a post-budget engagement with the media, Director of Research Dr. John Kwache said the Fiscal Responsibility Act should be reviewed to require the use of all borrowings to fund capital expenditure only, with none going to recurrent expenditure. This, he believes, will ensure capital expenditure is not shortchanged in resource allocation.
We are calling for a significant increase in capital expenditure. In fact, if you look at the budget 2023, capital expenditure is projected to be 27.7 billion, and this is 3.5% of GDP. Comparatively, compensation is 45 billion, interest payment is 52.6 billion. Can you imagine that we are paying as much as 52.6 billion to service our debt, when we are spending just about half of it, 27.7, on development? You see, so when people argue that we shouldn't be increasing our debt, we shouldn't be borrowing too much, these are the consequences.
Dr. Kwache also called for policies that will enrich fiscal and debt sustainability to foster macroeconomic stability and growth.
Linked to the overall deficit is the primary balance. because that's really the one that determines whether you are going to accumulate debt or not. And again, it is projected to be a deficit of minus 8.9 and minus 1.1% of GDP. We had called for the primary balance to be at least plus 1% of GDP, and we are sticking to that. You know, the projected deficit and the primary balance will not allow the public debt to return quickly enough to a sustainable trajectory. That's our worry. But if we were to go by our proposal, that will happen. So to accelerate a return of the debt to a sustainable path, we are further proposing that the Fiscal Responsibility Act be amended to reduce the deficit ceiling from the current level of 5% to 3%.
The IE believes it's about time to urge the economic management with strict rules so that the habitual costly policy experimentation and waywardness will stop. And that's it for Business Night for tonight. I am Pious Kojo Backah. Always a pleasure serving you. For more news, log on to myjoyonline.com/business.